It was just after midnight when the first 911 call came in. A terrified neighbor whispered into the phone that she had heard screams, a crash, and then, nothing. When officers arrived, the house on the corner of Rosewood Lane was eerily quiet. Lights flickered through half-drawn curtains, the front door slightly ajar. Inside, what they found would shake the entire community to its core. 2 bodies lay still. A husband and wife. Brutally murdered. No signs of forced entry. No signs of robbery. Whoever had come into that house wasn't a stranger. As investigators pieced through the bloody silence of that night, a shocking truth emerged. The woman responsible wasn't a thief, wasn't a random intruder. She had just been released from prison, only weeks earlier. She had spent 9 long years behind bars. And she had been there for a crime she did not commit. Her name was Keisha Monet Brown. Keisha grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, the middle child of 3 siblings. Her mother, Carolyn Brown, worked 2 jobs, mornings at a diner, evenings cleaning offices, just to keep the lights on. Keisha's father wasn't in the picture. He had walked out when she was only 6, leaving behind an emptiness that never quite healed. But despite the struggle, Keisha carried a smile that lit up any room. Teachers remembered her as a girl with dreams bigger than her circumstances. She wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to heal people. She wanted to lift her family out of poverty. Life in her neighborhood wasn't easy. The streets could pull you in quickly, and many of Keisha's childhood friends fell into traps of drugs, crime, and early pregnancies. But Keisha tried to stay focused. She poured herself into her studies, leaned on her church community, and helped raise her little brother when her mother was too exhausted from work. There was a resilience in her, a quiet strength that many admired. But even the strongest hearts have a weakness. And for Keisha, that weakness was love. She met him when she was just 21. Darnell Rashad Carter. Darnell came from Birmingham, Alabama. He was the kind of man people noticed the moment he walked into a room. Tall, sharply dressed, a smile that felt like a promise. To many, he was magnetic. To Keisha, he was everything she thought she had been waiting for. He spoke with confidence, moved with ambition, and carried himself like someone who was going places. Darnell's story, though, was different beneath the surface. Raised by a father who hustled for quick money and a mother who disappeared into her own battles with addiction, Darnell learned early that life wasn't fair. But he also learned something else: if you wanted to get ahead, you didn't play by the rules. You bent them. You broke them. You used charm, manipulation, whatever it took. And no one was better at that than Darnell Carter. For Keisha, he was intoxicating. The way he looked at her, the way he made her feel chosen in a world that often overlooked her, it was everything she craved. Their romance was fast, fiery, and overwhelming. Within months, they were inseparable. Friends warned her that he seemed too smooth, too good at talking his way into and out of things. But love has a way of silencing doubts. Keisha believed in him. She believed in their future. She couldn't see the storm he was already planning. Darnell wasn't satisfied with the slow grind of an honest life. He wanted money. Power. Status. He found his chance in a scheme involving stolen funds from a company he was working with. It was bold, reckless, and dangerous. But Darnell had no intention of paying the price if things went wrong. And that's where Keisha came in. He convinced her to sign paperwork she didn't understand, documents that tied her name to accounts she had never opened. He told her it was part of a business opportunity, a way for them to build something together. Keisha, blinded by love and trust, signed. She believed in him with all her heart. But when the scheme collapsed and authorities came knocking, it was Keisha's name on every piece of evidence. Bank accounts. Signatures. Transactions. Darnell made sure of it. The betrayal was swift and merciless. In court, Keisha sat stunned as prosecutors laid out a case that painted her as the mastermind. And when Darnell took the stand, he sealed her fate. He testified against her, carefully protecting himself, carefully shifting the weight of blame onto her shoulders. The man she loved. The man she trusted. He sacrificed her freedom to save his own. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. 9 years in prison. And as the gavel came down, Keisha turned to look at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. His were calm, almost detached. Hers were flooded with disbelief, heartbreak, and the crushing realization that her life had just been stolen. 9 years. 9 years she would never get back. But prison didn't break her. It hardened her. It changed her. It filled her with a quiet rage. Every day behind those walls was a reminder of the man who had destroyed her life. Every night she lay awake, replaying his lies, his betrayal, his testimony. She promised herself that if she ever walked free again, Darnell Carter would have to answer for what he did. And when she finally walked out of those gates 9 years later, Keisha was no longer the same woman. The smile that once lit up a room was gone. In its place was something else. A cold fire. A determination that nothing and no one could extinguish. And she had only one thing on her mind. Revenge. It was supposed to be just another quiet night on Rosewood Lane. A neighborhood where families left bicycles on the lawn, where porch lights flickered against the summer air, where people trusted each other enough to sleep with windows half open. But peace shattered that night. At 12:37 a.m., a neighbor whispered into her phone, her voice trembling. She said she heard screams. A crash. And then silence so heavy it pressed against her chest. The dispatcher begged her to stay on the line. Moments later, police cruisers screamed down the street, red and blue flashing across rows of sleeping homes. When officers entered the house, their footsteps echoed against walls lined with family photos. The television was still humming in the living room. 2 wine glasses sat half full on the table. But in the bedroom, everything changed. 2 lifeless bodies lay twisted in the sheets. A husband and wife, cut down in the place they thought safest. There were no signs of forced entry. No smashed windows. No broken locks. Whoever had walked into this house hadn't broken in, they had been let in. And soon, investigators uncovered a truth so haunting it left even seasoned detectives shaken. The killer wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a shadow passing through. She was someone with a history, someone who had already been punished by the law once before. A woman who had served nearly a decade in prison for a crime she never committed. Her name was Keisha Monet Brown. Keisha's story began far from Rosewood Lane, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, Georgia. Born in the early 1990s, she grew up in a home where survival was the goal, not luxury. Her mother, Carolyn, worked herself to exhaustion, waking before sunrise to serve coffee and eggs at a diner, then heading straight to evening shifts cleaning office floors. Her hands were calloused, her back ached constantly, but she did it for her children. Keisha's father wasn't there. He had walked out when she was only 6 years old, promising he'd come back one day, but never did. That absence carved a hole in Keisha's heart, one she spent years trying to fill with faith, family, and love. Even in hardship, Keisha carried a spark. Her smile could disarm strangers, her laughter could brighten the dullest classroom. Teachers remembered her as sharp, ambitious, and deeply kind. She dreamed of becoming a nurse, not for the paycheck, but because she wanted to heal people. She wanted to be the kind of person she wished had been there to heal her own family. But life in her neighborhood tested every dream. Crime was always close, boys she grew up with were swallowed by gangs, friends disappeared into the world of drugs and violence, girls her age became mothers before they finished high school. But Keisha fought to stay on track. She studied late at night, worked part-time jobs, and leaned on her church for guidance. Her younger brother, Malik, adored her. She was his second mother, the one who helped him with homework when their mom was too tired to keep her eyes open. Keisha promised Malik she would get out, that she'd make a better life for both of them. But even the strongest spirit can be undone by love. Keisha was 21 when she met him. Darnell Rashad Carter. Darnell wasn't like the boys Keisha had known all her life. He wasn't rough around the edges or careless with his words. He was smooth, charming, magnetic. The kind of man who could make a woman feel like the only person in a crowded room. He dressed sharp, spoke with confidence, and moved with ambition. For Keisha, who had spent her life struggling to be seen, Darnell was a spotlight. He looked at her as if she were special, chosen, destined for something greater. He filled the void her father had left years ago. But behind Darnell's polished exterior was a boy shaped by shadows. Raised in Birmingham, Alabama, he had grown up watching his father hustle for quick money on the streets, learning early that rules were made to be bent. His mother's absence, lost to her addictions, taught him that love was unreliable. Trust was dangerous. Success, he believed, wasn't earned by hard work, but taken through charm and cunning. And Darnell had perfected the art of taking. Their romance burned fast. Within weeks, Keisha was swept into his world. He bought her gifts, whispered promises of a future filled with comfort, told her she was the missing piece in his grand plan. Her friends noticed how quickly she had fallen. They warned her, uneasy about his too perfect words. But Keisha didn't listen. She was in love. Love has a way of silencing doubts, of covering red flags with rose-colored visions. What Keisha didn't see was that Darnell wasn't building a future, he was laying a trap. Darnell had been running schemes for years, dipping his hands into fraud and theft, always staying one step ahead of the law. But now, he wanted more. Bigger money. Bigger risks. He found his opportunity in an elaborate scheme involving stolen funds from a company he worked with. But he needed someone to hold the blame if things went wrong. That someone was Keisha. He asked her to sign paperwork she barely understood. He told her it was part of their business venture, that it would put them on the path to financial freedom. Keisha, desperate to believe in their future together, signed without question. When federal agents came crashing through their apartment door months later, Keisha's world collapsed. Every document, every bank account, every piece of evidence pointed to her. Her name was on everything. Darnell made sure of it. And when the case went to trial, the betrayal cut deeper than any prison sentence ever could. Prosecutors painted Keisha as the mastermind, a woman who orchestrated a multi-thousand-dollar fraud. And when Darnell took the stand, his testimony was the final nail. With smooth words and practiced calm, he shifted the weight of every crime onto her shoulders. The man she loved. The man she trusted. He sacrificed her freedom to save his own skin. Keisha sat in a courtroom, her hands trembling, tears stinging her eyes, as the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty. 9 years in prison. 9 years of her life, stolen in a single moment. As the gavel struck, Keisha turned to Darnell. For the briefest second, their eyes locked. His expression was detached, almost indifferent. Hers was flooded with disbelief, heartbreak, and something new, a seed of rage, buried deep but burning. They led her away in shackles. Her mother sobbed. Malik's small hands shook as he reached for her one last time before she disappeared behind cold steel doors. Keisha whispered to herself that day, a promise carved into her soul, if I survive this, he will pay. 9 years. 9 years of concrete walls and iron bars. 9 years of lost birthdays, lost holidays, lost dreams. 9 years of watching life move on without her. But prison didn't break her. It forged her. Every night she replayed Darnell's betrayal in her mind. Every morning she woke up, more determined. She had gone in innocent, but she was coming out with a purpose. And when the gates finally opened, and Keisha Brown stepped back into the world, she was no longer the young woman who once dreamed of saving lives. She was something else entirely. And in her heart, there was room for only one thing. Revenge. Prison doesn't just take your freedom. It takes your identity. Your dignity. The very pieces of yourself that make you human. The first night Keisha lay on that thin mattress, the fluorescent light buzzing above her, she felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. The sound of iron doors slamming echoed in her ears, each one a reminder that she was caged. She clutched the thin blanket against her chest, her tears soaking into the pillow, her heart breaking with every thought of her mother and Malik. 9 years. 9 years for a crime she didn't commit. She whispered her brother's name into the darkness. Malik. I'll come back to you. But the walls did not care. The walls never listened. Prison life was a cycle of humiliation. Guards barked orders that stripped women of their dignity. Count times at dawn. Cold showers under flickering lights. Food that barely resembled food. Every day was survival. Some women folded under the weight. Others lashed out in violence. Keisha did neither. She learned to endure. She forced herself to adapt to a world where trust was poison, where smiles hid knives, where kindness could be mistaken for weakness. But in the quiet, in the still hours of night, when the noise of the prison settled, that's when the pain returned. That's when she replayed the trial in her mind. The betrayal. The moment Darnell looked her in the eye and lied. The wound bled fresh every time. Her mother visited when she could, sitting across the scratched visitation glass, pressing her palm against it as if she could reach through and hold her daughter's hand. Malik grew taller with every visit, his voice deepening, his eyes sadder. He would whisper, "We miss you, Keisha." And she would force a smile, telling him, "I'll be home soon. Be strong for me." But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she'd survive 9 years in this place. Time has a cruel way of moving differently behind bars. Days blurred together into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. And while Keisha counted every second, outside those walls, Darnell was free. Free to breathe fresh air. Free to walk the streets. Free to reinvent himself. And he did. While Keisha sat in a cell, Darnell built a new life. He slipped into a corporate job under a new identity, laundering his past sins into respectability. He wore tailored suits, drove sleek cars, and charmed his way into social circles that Keisha could only dream about. But the deepest cut of all came 3 years into her sentence, when Malik wrote her a letter. His words were hesitant, trembling across the page. Keisha. I saw him. I saw Darnell. He was with someone. Her name is Latrice. They looked happy. Like a family. Like everything you wanted with him. Keisha dropped the letter, her hands shaking, her chest hollowing with pain. The man who stole her freedom, the man who left her to rot, had built a life with another woman. A woman who now had the future Keisha once dreamed of. In that moment, love turned to ash. And her rage hardened into something permanent. Prison tried to break her. But instead, it sharpened her. She began working in the prison library, reading law books, studying cases, learning the system that had destroyed her. She listened to women around her, their stories of betrayal, of survival. Each story mirrored her own in fragments, fueling her resolve. She started journaling, pouring her rage and sorrow into words. In those pages, she made herself a promise. Not just survival. Not just freedom. But justice. And not the kind found in courts. The kind written in blood. By her 6th year inside, Keisha was no longer the same young woman who walked into that courtroom in handcuffs. Her laughter was gone, her innocence stripped. In its place was steel. Her eyes no longer shimmered with hope. They burned with something darker. Her release date crawled closer. And with every passing day, she prepared herself for the moment the gates would open. For the world, it would be the return of an ex-convict, broken and forgotten. For Keisha, it would be the beginning of her reckoning. And as she dreamed of freedom, outside, Darnell's world only grew brighter. He and Latrice married. They bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where children could play in the yard without fear. They entertained friends, toasted with wine, posted smiling photos on social media. He was living the life Keisha had sacrificed. And he slept peacefully every night, never imagining the storm that was building behind prison walls. Finally, after 9 years, the day came. The heavy gates slid open. The guard handed her a small plastic bag, her belongings from the day she was arrested. A pair of earrings. A faded photograph of her mother and Malik. A worn-out Bible. Keisha stepped into the sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of freedom. But it didn't feel warm. It didn't feel sweet. It felt cold. It felt sharp. Because freedom meant she could finally keep the promise she had whispered in the courtroom 9 years earlier. Darnell Carter would pay. And this time, she wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a storm. Freedom is supposed to feel like salvation. For Keisha, it felt like stepping out of one prison and into another. The gates closed behind her, but the weight of the last 9 years clung to her skin. She walked out with nothing but the clothes she had worn on the day of her arrest, clothes that no longer fit her, that smelled of time and dust. The world moved faster now. Cars looked sleeker, phones were like tiny computers in people's hands. The city pulsed with a rhythm she no longer recognized. But the deepest change wasn't in the world. It was in her. She had come out harder. Colder. And with only one mission burning in her soul. Her mother tried to welcome her home with warmth, cooking her favorite stew, filling the small apartment with the scent of smoked fish and spices. Malik, now a grown man, hugged her tight, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're home, Keisha. Finally home." But home didn't feel like home. The walls were smaller. The smiles didn't reach her heart. She sat at the dinner table, spoon in hand, staring at the food, but tasting nothing. Her mind wasn't in that kitchen. It was somewhere else. It was with him. With Darnell. The man who had stolen 9 years of her life and built a paradise on the ashes of her suffering. At night, Keisha couldn't sleep. She would sit by the window, staring into the darkness, her fingers clutching the photograph Malik had once given her of Darnell and Latrice. A stolen snapshot. They were smiling. His arm was around her waist. Her hand rested on his chest. Every time Keisha looked at it, her chest tightened, her breath grew sharp, her rage deepened. She whispered into the night, "You will not sleep easy. Not anymore." It started small. She rode buses across town to neighborhoods she had never been allowed to step into before. Clean streets, trimmed lawns, families jogging with dogs at dusk. She walked past the house, their house. She saw the manicured lawn, the shiny car parked neatly in the driveway, the wreath hanging cheerfully on the front door. Through the curtains, she saw them. Latrice laughing in the kitchen. Darnell carrying groceries inside. They looked like a picture out of a magazine. And Keisha felt the bile rise in her throat. That life was supposed to be hers. That laughter was supposed to be hers. The wedding, the home, the family, all stolen by the man who had lied, who had condemned her to 9 years in a cage. So she came back again. And again. And again. She knew their schedule, when Darnell left for work, when Latrice jogged in the mornings, when the lights went off at night. It became her obsession. But obsession eats at the soul. Her mother noticed the change. "Keisha, you're barely here. You sit in silence, staring into space. What are you thinking about?" Keisha would force a smile, whispering, "I'm just adjusting, Mama." But inside, she wasn't adjusting. She was plotting. Every bus ride to that neighborhood was a rehearsal. Every night spent awake was another page in her plan. Her journals, once filled with prayers for freedom, now became blueprints for revenge. She drew maps of the streets around their house. She wrote down license plate numbers, schedules, details no one else noticed. She was meticulous. Precise. Patient. 9 years had taught her patience. And as she watched him, as she saw him kiss Latrice on the porch, saw him cradle her hand as they walked, saw him live as though Keisha never existed, something inside her snapped further. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't just rage. It was hunger. The hunger to make him feel what she felt. To make him live her nightmare. To make him drown in the same darkness he had cast her into. But life outside wasn't easy for an ex-convict. Employers slammed doors in her face. Old friends avoided her calls. Strangers judged her when they saw the mark on her record. She felt invisible in a world that had moved on without her. And yet, in her invisibility, she found her weapon. Because no one noticed her when she lingered near their house. No one asked questions when she sat quietly on buses, watching, listening, memorizing. She had become a ghost. A ghost with unfinished business. Her mother begged her to move on. Malik tried to pull her back to life, urging her to go back to school, to find work, to start over. But Keisha would only nod, pretending to listen. Inside, her heart was already gone. Her future wasn't in rebuilding. It was in destruction. She stood outside their house one night, the street quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. She could see them through the window, Latrice setting the table, Darnell walking in behind her, smiling, laughing, kissing her neck. Keisha pressed her nails into her palms so hard that her skin broke. Blood trickled down her hand. And as she watched, one thought crystallized in her mind. They would never know peace. Not as long as she breathed. The night it happened was deceptively ordinary. The neighborhood was calm, the streetlights glowing faintly, children tucked into bed, families winding down with television and laughter. On the surface, it was peace. But for Keisha, it was war. She had been watching long enough. She had been waiting too long. Tonight, patience gave way to purpose. She moved like a shadow. A hoodie pulled tight, her steps careful on the pavement. She had memorized every creak in the fences, every angle of the security lights. She knew when Darnell's car would return, when Latrice's laughter would echo through the kitchen. This wasn't chance. This was choreography. And Keisha had been rehearsing it for months. Inside, Darnell and Latrice were finishing dinner. Music played softly in the background, R&B, smooth and comforting. They leaned close, sharing whispers, unaware that just outside their window, death was crouched in silence, watching. Keisha's heart pounded like a war drum. Her palms were slick with sweat, but her grip on the knife was steady. For 9 years, she had dreamed of this moment. And now it was here. The door wasn't locked. That was their first mistake. The second was trusting that the past had stayed buried. She slipped inside like smoke. The sound of her breathing was drowned by the music. Her eyes burned as she took in the scene, their home, their happiness, their stolen joy. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, knife glinting under the light. Latrice turned first. Her smile froze, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Keisha," she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. But Keisha wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Darnell. The man who had lied. The man who had left her in chains while he built a life with someone else. "Do you know what you took from me?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage and pain. "Do you know what 9 years feels like?" Darnell's face drained of color. He raised his hands, his voice urgent, pleading. "Keisha, listen, please, let's talk." But there was no talk left. Only reckoning. The knife came down in a blur of fury. Latrice screamed, the sound piercing through the night. Neighbors stirred in their homes, but none fast enough, none close enough to stop what had already begun. Keisha's rage was volcanic, unstoppable. Every strike was 9 years of suffering unleashed, every thrust of the blade a scream from the cage she had been forced to rot in. Darnell fought back, grabbing her wrists, shoving her against the counter, shouting her name. But she was relentless, her strength fed by pain, by betrayal, by an obsession that had consumed her whole. Latrice tried to intervene, her hands clawing at Keisha, her voice begging for mercy. But Keisha's mind saw only red. In that storm of violence, Latrice became part of the debt. 2 lives. 2 bodies crumpled in their own kitchen, the warmth of their home drowned in blood. When it was done, Keisha stood over them, chest heaving, hands trembling. The knife clattered to the floor, its shine dulled by crimson. The music still played, a cruel soundtrack to the carnage. She looked down at Darnell's lifeless eyes, at Latrice's still body, and for a moment, a fleeting, breathless moment, she felt nothing. No joy. No triumph. Just emptiness. 9 years could never be returned. Revenge had given her no freedom. It had only forged a new cage, one built from blood and guilt. Outside, the neighborhood remained quiet. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a baby cried. Life went on, unaware that inside one perfect home, the past had finally caught up, and it had left nothing but ruin. And Keisha, once the victim, was now the monster. The house was silent. But silence does not last long when blood has been spilled. It was a neighbor who heard it first, the scream, cut short, sharp enough to pierce the still night. At first, she dismissed it as a domestic quarrel, the kind that flickers and dies before anyone dares to interfere. But when the music stopped, when the air outside hung heavy with unease, she knew something was wrong. She dialed 911. Her voice trembled. "There's something happening next door, please, send someone." The police arrived within minutes, sirens flashing red and blue against the quiet suburban street. They approached cautiously, their boots crunching against gravel, hands poised over holsters. The door was unlocked. Inside, what they found would haunt even the most seasoned officers. Darnell lay sprawled on the kitchen floor, eyes wide open, frozen in terror. Beside him, Latrice's body was twisted unnaturally, her lifeblood pooling beneath her. The walls bore streaks of violence, the furniture knocked askew, the aftermath of a struggle that had ended only one way. And in the center of it all, Keisha. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She was sitting on the floor, hands sticky with blood, staring blankly at the bodies as though waiting for them to wake up. When the officers shouted commands, she didn't resist. She simply lifted her hands, her voice flat and hollow. "It's over," she whispered. "It's all over." The arrest was swift, but the shockwaves were not. News traveled fast. By morning, the story had spread beyond the neighborhood, exploding across television screens and news feeds. Former lover kills couple in suburban bloodbath. Jealousy and obsession end in double homicide. After 9 years in prison, woman takes revenge. Every headline painted Keisha as a monster. Every photograph of Darnell and Latrice became a reminder of lives cut short. And every whispered conversation in the community circled back to the same question: could this have been prevented? The trial was a circus. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters jostling for sound bites, strangers screaming for justice. Inside, Keisha sat in silence, dressed in prison orange, her hair tied back, her face expressionless. But her eyes told the story, the exhaustion of years, the madness of obsession, the emptiness that followed her vengeance. The prosecution painted her as cold-blooded, methodical, a predator who had planned the murders long before she acted. They replayed the 911 calls, showed photographs of the crime scene, and brought neighbors to testify about the screams in the night. The defense tried to argue trauma, manipulation, mental illness. They spoke of her 9 years in prison, of a love that had been twisted into something toxic and unrecognizable. They pleaded for the jury to see her as broken, not evil. But the jury didn't see shades of gray. They saw blood. They saw loss. They saw 2 innocent lives stolen. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Guilty of first-degree murder. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words landed like a final nail in a coffin. Keisha closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked almost relieved, as though the waiting, the rage, the endless hunger for justice had finally ended in something permanent, something immovable. Her story began with betrayal. It ended with chains. But this time, there would be no release. Outside the courthouse, Latrice's family clutched photographs of her, tears streaming as they spoke of a woman full of light and laughter who never deserved such a brutal end. Darnell's family, too, wept openly, caught between grief and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the man they loved with the secrets and lies that had brought them here. For the community, it was a scar that would never fade. For Keisha, it was a cage she had built with her own hands. And for the world watching, it was a chilling reminder: obsession doesn't free you. It consumes you. And so, in the end, 3 lives were lost that night: Darnell's, Latrice's, and Keisha's. Only 2 bodies went into the ground. But all 3 futures were buried. The cell door slammed shut. For Keisha, that sound was not new. She had heard it before: 9 long years of metal locks and endless nights behind bars. But this time, it was different. This time, it was forever. She had walked out of prison once, clinging to the fragile promise of freedom. She thought she was reclaiming her life, but instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. And now, the cycle had come full circle. Freedom had betrayed her. Love had betrayed her. And in her desperation for justice, she betrayed herself. We often look at stories like this and ask why. Why didn't she move on? Why couldn't she let go? Why let anger become the fuel that burns everything in its path? But anger, once ignited, doesn't die easily. It festers. It grows. It consumes until there is nothing left but ashes. Keisha was not born a monster. She was a woman who loved too deeply, who trusted too blindly, and who suffered too silently. But love, when poisoned, can become just as dangerous as hate. Think of Latrice. A woman who had dreams of her own, laughter that filled rooms, a future she was still building. She never asked to be part of this war, yet she became its most tragic casualty. Her life ended not because of what she did, but because of what she represented: a new beginning for Darnell, and a final betrayal in Keisha's eyes. Think of Darnell. A man who walked the thin line between charm and deceit. His choices set the stage, his silence sharpened the blade, his secrets poured gasoline over the fire. In the end, he paid the price too. And then think of Keisha. 9 years already stolen, 9 years she could never get back. All she wanted was fairness, an acknowledgement of her pain. But instead of healing, she chased vengeance. And in doing so, she lost the last thing she had left: her future. This story is not about heroes. It is not about villains. It is about choices. Choices that seemed small at first: a lie, a betrayal, a silence when truth was needed. Each choice added weight until the whole fragile structure collapsed in blood. How many lives are destroyed not by one great act of evil, but by 1,000 little acts of neglect? By the things we hide, the apologies we never make, the wounds we never face. Tonight, somewhere, another Keisha is sitting in her room, staring at a phone, waiting for a call that will never come. Somewhere, another Darnell is juggling lies, convincing himself no one will ever find out. Somewhere, another Latrice is walking unknowingly into the crossfire of someone else's unfinished pain. We tell these stories not because they are rare, but because they are far too common. Because when love turns to obsession, when betrayal festers instead of healing, tragedy is never far behind. In the end, Keisha thought she was reclaiming her dignity by taking lives. But dignity built on blood is only another form of destruction. 3 people lost everything that night. 2 to the grave. 1 to a cage. And the lesson echoes louder than any headline, louder than any verdict. We cannot undo betrayal by creating more pain. We cannot heal by destroying. We cannot be free by taking freedom from others. So the world moved on. The case faded from the news, the cameras found new tragedies to broadcast, and the public soon forgot. But in quiet corners, in the empty chair at Latrice's family table, in the silence of Darnell's absence, in the cold cell where Keisha spends the rest of her days, the story still lives. And maybe that is the cruelest truth of all. Not that it ended in violence, but that it could have ended differently. If someone had spoken sooner. If someone had listened deeper. If love had been honest, and grief had been allowed to heal. But none of that happened. And so here we are, left with nothing but questions, tears, and the echo of a story that should never have been told. This is not just Keisha's story. It is a warning. A reminder. That obsession can chain us just as tightly as any prison cell. That betrayal kills not just trust, but futures. That sometimes, the worst tragedies are not caused by strangers in the dark, but by the people we loved most. And when the dust settles, when the sirens fade, when the courtroom empties, all that remains are lives shattered beyond repair.